Hi there. This is a recording. It's a bit different to what I've done before. Carolyn Southwell here. I wanted to reflect on some of the experiences I've had in the last 20 hours or so and teach a lesson based on that, looking at personal responsibility and emotions and being triggered. So I'm going to tell you a story because that's the easiest way that I know how to do this, and because there's a few characters, I am bringing in a whiteboard. So here's me, Carolyn, and yesterday I was here at a co-working space and I discovered a friend of mine, we're going to call her Sally, who I could see was quite upset. Now, I was already not having a great day. I was having a bit of a rough time, and it became obvious that I needed a hug as much as she did. And in our conversation, it became obvious to me that there was actually what was upsetting her a lot, actually had something to do with this guy here, James, not his real name. And what she thought that I knew what was happening with James. It's a pretty big deal. It's not a very happy scenario for, a man that we both care about. But she had also been sworn to secrecy. And so she was really worried about James, and she was sitting in a space of her emotional reaction to what she understood was happening with James. Now, being sworn to secrecy, I wanted to respect whatever was happening. Now, James is a good friend of mine as well, but if there was a reason that he didn't want me to know, or that he only wanted a certain number of people to know, I was willing to accept that and to just hold my friend Sally, who was really upset. When I left her to go to dinner last night and see if I could send James a message to just let him know that, Sally really cares about him and that I care about him and that I hope that everything is okay, I discovered that the ways that I would usually be able to connect with him had been cut off. And so my mind, with the tiny amount of information that Sally had spilled before she went, I'm not allowed to tell you, my mind got completely, it went on its own little roller coaster ride and journey, and came up with the worst possible scenario, which in my mind meant that James not only was in trouble, but was probably on his deathbed. And this is one of the friends who I have come to love the most in the entire time that I have been here in Bali. And probably one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever met in my whole life. So the idea of losing him, of him no longer being in physical form, was pretty gut-wrenching and heartbreaking. But of course, it was all based on a thought, a story I'd created in my mind, and then I was having a real physical, emotional reaction based on that. When I sat at dinner and was writing James an email, because it was the only way I could think to get through, maybe not even knowing whether or not he'd see the email, and letting him know how much I love him, I burst into tears and was sobbing uncontrollably. And a friend of mine, Dave, was at that restaurant and saw me and came over to console me and give me a big hug. Now, Dave also knows James, and I realised that this was going to bring up, that it was also going to be sad for Dave because he also cares about James. And, I asked him how he's feeling, and he said, look, I process my own emotions in my own way, and I'm like, that's cool. And when I got home that night, I found out that actually James was not in hospital on his deathbed, but rather in custody for something that he probably didn't do. But even if he did, it's in my mind and in the mind of probably a lot of people in the world, what he's being held for is quite trivial. However, it could have very big consequences for where we live. And so that's really scary. It's really scary for Sally, who is even closer to James than I am. It's really scary for me, but it's not as scary as thinking that he is, maybe on his deathbed or dying. I made a point of sending Dave a message last night to just let him know, hey, it's not as bad as I thought, but it's not ideal. It's not a great situation for him to be in, but the good news is we know he's alive and for the most part well, even if he's distressed. Now I got a reply from Dave this morning, and it means that I'm in a pretty interesting state of reflection, but also sadness. I wanted to make sure that I let Dave know that it wasn't as bad with James as the situation wasn't as bad as I had feared. And I felt a little bit silly at when my mind had jumped to, but that's what the mind does, and it's just lessons for me. And because Dave has experienced loss of people very close to him at a very young age, I knew through my work as a coach that the potential loss of our friend James was probably going to trigger a whole lot of stuff for him. So I wanted to make sure that I'd let him know. But what was really interesting was watching his messages come in this morning. And he said, thanks for letting me know, and your friend is a retard, like referring to Sally. How could she not let you know that he's not dead? How could she leave you hanging like that? What an awful person, basically. And I just looked at this emotional reaction and I replied gently, she was doing the best that she knew how, and I just have compassion for her. And he's like, nah, that's bullshit. I can't believe that she did that. She should have told you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this topic is not helpful to discuss. I'm going home. Have a good day. And after a few back and forth, and I sat there looking at his final messages, and I went, this is a classic case of what is, let's see if this fits on the board. This is what people sometimes call the drama triangle. We have people who are actually this would be better if this was this, the persecutor. So Dave is persecuting, maybe you can't see that, but that's a P for persecutor. And victim and rescuer, right? So the way that this played out is that last night I was very sad and distraught at the idea that James could be dead or very much on his way to that. And so Dave's reaction with me was to see me as a victim and to come and rescue me. And now hearing that the news was not as we expected, he has come along and played persecutor. He's persecuted Sally and said, how could she make you feel that way? But she didn't. And as I said to him in my messages, I said, she can't make me feel anything. My reactions are my responsibility. The fact that I took the small amount of information that she gave me and decided not to press her for more details, but then reacted based on the story that my mind had created, that's all my shit. That's all mine. Now, I was grateful for his love and attention while I was so sad, but it's really interesting now to zoom out and to see that this is the roles we'd fallen into, and easy to say, well, that was what was, the role he was playing, but really, was I falling into victim? Maybe I was. I don't know. I was very sad, and so this is possible. But it was really interesting to see Dave's message this morning and really see this play out. Because out here is what's called 100% personal responsibility. And 100% personal responsibility says, if something upsets me, if something makes me want to reach out and call somebody a retard, like Dave did in his message this morning, Dave being a man that I care about immensely, and thus the changing of names, because I want to protect all of these beautiful people, but the lesson's too good not to share. In persecuting Sally, Dave has played within this triangle, and probably because he doesn't know any better. Most people don't know any better. In fact, as I walked around this co-working space looking for somebody to be able to have an engaged and engaging conversation around personal responsibility, I looked at the people that I knew, and then I thought back to the conversations and behaviours I'd seen, and I realised most people are still stuck in here. Most people are still stuck in this drama triangle. And I couldn't have this conversation with any of them. Even changing the names to be able to protect people, which of course I would have done. The playing out here says I'm responsible for how I'm showing up. It says I, Carolyn, could have said to Sally, well, hey, now that I know that there's something wrong, I need more details because I'm driving myself insane. My mind has come up with this idea of him lying in a hospital bed dead. You know, is he alive? Is he dead? Is he in hospital? You know, what can you tell me, because my mind is driving me nuts. So that's the piece that I could have played, right? Now, as it turns out, the information came to me anyway. And then when I told her, she was like, oh my gosh, that's so much worse than what's really happening. You've just given me a really helpful perspective, right? But I don't hold any angst towards her. She was just doing the best that she knew how. And so I'm taking responsibility for the fact that I took a small amount of information and I blew it out of my mind, blew it, and God love it, blew it out of proportion, and turned it into this sob story that made me feel like totally, uncontrollably, unbearably distraught. And that's my responsibility, right? And yes, I was grateful, very grateful to Dave for being there to hold me while I was so sad, but I was also watching him and going, I wonder what's coming up for him right now. And it's pushed him into this space so strongly, because what it's triggered in him is full-on childhood traumas that I know about, that I'm not sure that a lot of other people know about, but he's not ready to face yet. And it's not my place to tell him that he needs to jump out here. But this is a space that I choose to hang out in. I choose to hang out in this space where I do look at what is triggering me. If I'm reacting really violently, why? You know, I'm not going to react to something if there's no hook. And in this case for Dave, there's a really strong hook. So there's nothing left for me to do in that message, because we're playing different games. He's playing this game, and I'm doing my very best every day to play this game of 100% personal responsibility. And it's not my job to force him out here, but it does leave me in a really strong space of sadness. You know, my emotional reaction is that I feel sad because this man that I care about is stuck in this space. He's not ready yet to jump out here. And, you know, maybe some days in less full-on emotional situations, with things that trigger things that are much smaller for him, maybe he does play this game. I don't know. But I was just sitting in this state of sadness going, gosh, the peace that will come when he plays out here and realises that he's responsible for how he feels, and that if he's being triggered, he can go inside and look at what it's about, right? And so I wanted to share this message for a couple of reasons. One, I needed to get this story out of me, and I can put it on video, and I know that some of you babes will really get it, really appreciate it, so much more than so many of the people I'm surrounded by here, even in a place like Ubud, even where this is the shit that we in theory do every day. But I'm not so convinced. So thank you for witnessing, and I hope that there's something in there for you. And if there's something that has come up that you feel like you need to tell me or teach me or share with me, please go ahead and do that. I'm very open. Love, carolinsouthwell.com.